What's up, everyone? I hope everyone's having the best day. And today we've got a video about potential. Sometimes potential is great as we get expectations to see of what the character can truly do, and we can see their journey in their realizing their potential. And other times, potential is so destructive as the weight of expectation can destroy a character completely. Today, we're going to focus on the latter to see what potential and how potential kills a character. And this will be in the lens of both Blue Lock as well as Jujutsu Kaisen, going through Nagi and Megumi respectively. Let's get straight to the video.
Personal opinions. Viewer discretion is advised. The role of having unfulfilled potential in any given story, or being a potential man, if you will, is one that is not exactly a glorified or highly esteemed position in contrast to many other basic character archetypes in fiction. If you were around during the height of people's disappointment during the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, you know someone like Megumi who filled this role is a prime example of this. Despite having much more to his character than being a 10 Shadows merchant, the main thing
it is true. As a quick point, I think everyone's seen that one meme of Megumi with a Superman suit, and that really was the start of the character assassination of Megumi. But let's get back into the video.
People could focus on, myself included, was what he wasn't given in the story. All the hype about his ability with the 10 Shadows, the capacity to surpass Gojo, Sukuna Glaze, his incomplete domain, none of these things really came to fruition in a way that was expected of him, and for a multitude of reasons, some valid, some not.
Pressure.
This either enraged a part of the core fanbase, or led them to a level of mockery that haunts me even in my nightmares. This fact is also true in becoming more prominent with Nagi after the reveal of him not making top 23 and being locked off by ego. Hilarious memes showing Nagi, a character who was once portrayed as the god of the field, as the god of french fries and cheeseburgers, various amounts of coping, theorizing, and speculating, as well as genuine disdain or disappointment in Nagi for not living up to
memes in the real world really do so much in the character imagery that people have. It's just so bad. Sometimes once a bad narrative gets on the character, it's very hard for it to be removed until the author does something genuinely drastic. And Nagi is the most recent prime target. Nagi, crazy work for him.
Hype are all reactions I have seen in relation to the last 2 or 3 chapters of Blue Lock. Now, I'm not here to speculate on a return to form for Nagi in this video. I merely want to analyze this phenomenon and peel back some of the layers for you watching this, using Nagi and Megumi as examples in a similar way to me post Jujutsu Kaisen. While the widespread popularity of anime and manga contributes to Megumi and Nagi facing the brunt of these criticisms, the potential man archetype nonetheless is one that has always been disliked, even going back to older series having characters like Gohan after the Cell Saga and Toshiro throughout the entirety of Bleach being pretty big examples of this. So the first question to ask is, why make Nagi and Megumi fall short of what we were promised to see from them? For starters, and I'm sorry for...
I didn't even realize that. And let me actually slow this down a little bit, because I do want to actually pay attention a bit more. But that is actually very good too. But in example of Toshiro and also Gohan, the thing with those two is that we actually do see their potential. So it's quite the opposite. But then again, we do have a lot more episodes of both Bleach and Dragon Ball Z. Because I don't think Gohan officially reaches his full potential until the Cell Saga, which is in around episode of like 180 roughly around there. And then obviously Toshiro doesn't reach his true Bonkai until the 3rd arc of the final arc when they're actually in the palace. So maybe we just need to give Nagi some time so he might actually realize it. But obviously for JJK, we do know that he never actually reached his potential. But very interesting. I completely forgot about those characters.
The potentially triggering phrase here, sometimes that's the point. It's not always executed with grace, it's not always done well, but aside from just being like unable to handle the lore implications of a character reaching their best, these authors know what they're doing. In Megumi's example, the purpose of having him not become a Gojo, Sukuna, or hell, even Yuta tier threat in the verse is because it's important to highlight his humanity and importance outside of sorcery. His capacity for connections, for love, for growth, for happiness, for purpose, without just being strong shadow guy. In stark contrast to someone like Gojo, Megumi has never given off the vibe of someone who loves jujutsu. Much of his motivation to get stronger is for some greater desire to balance the scales in his own life, keep up with his rapidly growing friends, or just protect the people that he cares about. An innate and core yearning for evolution isn't something inherently tied to his narrative. That combined with the fact that we see Megumi resist the impulses for the perceived greatness of power does somewhat foreshadow or hint at a version of the character that doesn't even try to achieve that, at least not wholeheartedly. Now, directly off the heels of JJK ending, you couldn't have said this to me. I might have smacked the taste out of your mouth and summoned Mahoraga to take us both out if you even hinted at this not being the worst writing decision in the world. And while I do still have my own problems and critiques of Gege's approach, many of which I'll discuss later, I do now recognize that at the bare minimum, there was a purpose. The purpose in his case being themes and such. In a world where Gojo is isolated because of power, and Sukuna continually destroys and consumes because his strength only allows for him to live one way, doesn't it make sense for the character most exposed to both of these forces to decide for himself whether or not he wants to walk down that path? From that lens, I think it makes total sense that Megumi's character arc ended the way it did. Its purpose falls in line with much of the core ideals Gege is demonstrating throughout the manga. In the same vein, no matter where Kaneshiro takes Nagi's arc here, a purpose can still be derived from these last few chapters. Let's say you're in the camp that thinks Nagi is gone. Full stop, no exception. His existence in the story, his potential, his regression, all of it can act as a warning of sorts. A story like Blue Lock, a story that intends to exist almost like a roadmap that informs you of Ego's idea of success, needs not only show you what works, but also what doesn't. In fact, I'd argue that when trying to teach someone a new concept or show them why they should listen to you, you'd have an easier time making your point by just giving them an example of what a bad playthrough looks like. This is what happens if you don't focus, sort of thing. And we see this rhetorical device used by Ego in Blue Lock a number of times. Being specific to Nagi, his character arc may be a warning of what happens if you overwater a flower. And I use that language for a pretty specific reason. What Nagi's an example of, or what he could be an example of, is an improper mix of love and self-sufficiency. While both are supremely important for one's development, especially when one is still finding their own sense of self, tilting the scales too much in one direction can absolutely ruin the growth of any given individual. Not enough attention, and they'll wilt away like a rose in the desert. Too much, and you run the risk of drowning them. It's quite clear that Nagi and Ryo's relationship is an unfortunately heartbreaking example of the latter. Once again, assuming that Nagi truly is locked off for good. After Nagi leaves to pair up with Isagi in the second selection, Ryo is forced to adapt to his new situation, an environment with more hardship than love, and Nagi is too, for a time. However, when they reunite in the Neo-Egoist League, all of that progress goes out the window when facing Isagi and realizing he's still unable to beat him alone. Rather than facing Isagi by himself and potentially failing, he chooses to rely on Ryo, and Ryo, rather than rejecting this advance, rejecting this call for help, rejecting this call for codependency, wants to be desired and wants to be needed by Nagi in order to be the duo that can take the World Cup by storm. As Ego says, in beating Isagi, specifically when he wasn't capable of doing it on his own and dousing his fire, Nagi lost the ability to fight and hunger for victory in the same way as he did before. Ryo continuing to water him after the fact only sealed his fate. I continue to use the plant watering analogy because it's one used in Blue Lock episode Nagi, specifically in reference to Nagi's cactus. As a desert plant, it'll only do poorly with too much attention and water, and Nagi's similarities to his plant are pointed out right then and there. If this is truly the end for Nagi Seishiro, if this is truly the end for Blue Lock's potential man, then that was the point. Building up his aura, building up how much he could possibly achieve in the world of football, only to tear it away due to mismanagement, would function as a cautionary tale, both for the characters within the story and us as the audience consuming it. It's possible, though, that you don't believe in Nagi's departure from Blue Lock, at least not forever, and in that case, I still find there to be purpose in his arc here. Not only is it great week-to-week drama that progresses Ryo and Nagi's dynamic, but more in line with the point I was making earlier, this could further act as a guide for how to remedy a situation like this. Rather than acting exclusively as a cautionary tale, Nagi could be here to show us what would go wrong, and importantly, how to fix that. If you've experienced codependency or haven't developed agency and self-expression in a way that you see fit, Kaneshiro writing out how Nagi will overcome this is sure to at least give you some direction and an idea of what it is that you might need to do. There are a myriad of perspectives Kaneshiro may have when it comes to reversing a situation like this, and in that scenario, in a scenario which Nagi coming back is viable, recovery would be the point. But regardless of how you feel about Megumi and Nagi as characters, it's undeniable that there is a purpose for what they go through or what they don't go through, and an intention behind them failing by the story's standards. Now, if you remember what I said earlier, the first question is, what's the point? The second question is, does it work? And is it good? A question that is unfortunately a little bit more tricky to answer. We've established that there was a greater narrative purpose in making these decisions for Megumi and Nagi, but determining whether or not that point was handled well, or if it's even an idea worth pursuing from a viewer's perspective, is a whole nother can of worms. I'll give my blunt opinion on both characters' storylines in a little bit, but first, I'll work through the pros and cons of their specific execution.
Can I just take a moment to just rate the transitions and the animations and all the changes? This is a very well crafted video. I just want to appreciate it because following my own trying to implement neat video editing, this must have taken him ages. But yeah, all the parallels up and down, the split screens, Very nice videos. Shout out to Broken Ronin, because this guy always has great videos, and it must take a lot of time and care to give us the heat. But it is I'm so far agree with everything. Whether the point is to show them the worst possible outcome, or it's to show us them reaching rock bottom and then rising from rock bottom. Both narratives can work for either story. It is all about personal preference of what the author wants and what his intention overall is for that character in the story. And either way, I'm a fan of both of them. For me, I do obviously like I always like happy endings. So the recovery route is always more enjoyable for me personally. But if he does generally go the route of Nagi completely locked off, then that's understandable as well. People from like 300 chapters ago still saying Kira will be back, but no, he's just another example of what happens when you don't have a strong enough ego. And this might be the case with Nagi as well. Who knows?
Starting with Megumi once again. I am of the belief that Megumi's start and end point within his character arc are fine, and in fact, even good depending on who you ask. Where Gege loses the plot a little bit, at least in my view, is in taking the proper steps to deliver us to his conclusion in a way that doesn't just feel like he straight up had nothing more for the character. I say this largely in part because his last big conflict prior to getting saved by Itadori comes in the way of fighting Reggie, a character who cursed him, sure, but in no other way challenged his beliefs about sorcery, strength, or anything truly relevant to his final moments in the story. One could argue that Reggie cursing Megumi to let fate toy with him and then die would be all the foreshadowing we need that something horrific would happen to him, and I could understand that perspective somewhat, but much of the inner turmoil that came from fate toying with him isn't even expressed by the character, and he certainly doesn't end up dead by the story's end, so I can't entirely say I'm convinced of that being an adequate penultimate moment for his character. As a result of this, Megumi sort of just appears at the end of his journey without much insight into how he feels, what made him come to grips with the situation, and most importantly, how he can live in a world like Jujutsu Kaisen without the strength to enact his own form of karma. We get a really insightful, really heartfelt conversation between Yuji and Megumi in the final moments of the story, but in my opinion, that just doesn't feel respectful enough of a character that functions as the deuteragonist for about 200 chapters of the story. I think being possessed by Sukuna would have actually been a great way to explore all of these ideas, possibly showing Megumi's reaction to the full extent of the 10 shadows and what he could possibly become if he followed the malevolent path of Ryomen Sukuna. Maybe seeing Gojo die, Kashima's desire for connections while being strong, and even Sukuna describing himself as a curse in the very end would push him to introspect about the isolationist mentality that sorcery in its current state propagates. To see him think and ponder about these ideas, even if not super blatantly, in some way would have made the transition smoother in my opinion. Now, I don't deem myself any sort of writer, at least not one as competent as Gege, so it wouldn't have to be the specific examples that I laid out, but some moment of note between his fight with Reggie and his conclusion would have been greatly appreciated, especially for a character of his role and relevance. I understand that much of Gege's writing style relies on these sudden character revelations or emotionally moving moments changing the course of their narrative, but it feels like Megumi lacked even that. A moment akin to him opening his domain, Maki's limits being released in Sakurajima, and Yuji's introspective domain chapter are just a few examples of approaches that could have been taken when writing Megumi's story, specifically in the latter half. To have him choose to reject the convention of sorcery and power is fine with me. To have that development happen off screen is less fine. The moment that Megumi decides that he is no longer pursuing strength or his potential—
This is quite interesting because there's so many similarities. I want to say it's so many similarities between Megumi and Sakura, but Sakura gets all this additional hate, and Megumi someone gets a pass. Maybe it's because a cooler character, but who knows? But yeah, not enough for it's just not enough at the end of the day for a character with 200 chapters. It just isn't enough, and Gege for me really lost the ball in the last 40 chapters of the story because there was so little depth between anything that was happening. It was just fight this, fight that, fight this, fight no. Not good enough, but hey, like I said, like the video says, I'm not a writer either, but there's sure so much more could have been done if they added another like 50 chapters and more depth between each of the fights and more downtime rather than fight after fight. But that's how JJK had to end, unfortunately.
Is something we never get to see, and based on earlier moments in the manga, I still cling to the idea that we are meant to believe Megumi was striving for more power, even if he didn't think he could do it and wasn't seeking strength for strength's sake. As I'm sure you can tell, I'm not the biggest fan of Megumi's handling as a character, specifically post 212, but that's largely because I view it as a really interesting concept within the framework of a battle shonen, kinda just wasting away because of Gege's particulars as a writer. In a meta way, Megumi doesn't just fail to reach his potential in-universe, he also fails to do so as a narrative device to the audience. Or some of them, anyway. There may be something greater to the commentary Gege is trying to make about art at large, you know, something potential isn't real, something live in the moment, something acceptance of the present. But for the time being, I don't rate this approach too highly. In stark contrast to this, I think Nagi's character, regardless of where it falls, has been continually established and set up, making the two possible conclusions that I've laid out satisfying for different reasons. Whereas I feel as if Megumi not reaching the heights of his potential isn't pushed forward as a super viable outcome early on, in Nagi's case, that's almost the crux of his character. Talent, codependency, and unfulfilled potential are all absolutely fundamental to the creature known as Nagi Seishiro. We've seen him struggle and grapple with what he lacks, especially after the Bastard Munchin and Manshine City game, and we've seen his fate spelled out in so many words by Ego. Granted, Ego isn't God, he doesn't have to be right, but the setup is certainly there. A constant reliance on Reo, commentary characters like Agi and Ego reprimanding him for choosing the path of least resistance, and the multiple encounters with other egoists like Rin and Baro show how Nagi's fate has been in the balance for a while. Hell, almost 100 chapters ago, this sense of—
Very well done. I just have to add that it's true. It's about time we start putting the Blue Lock author, apologize, I don't know his name, into this writing and as a genuine mangaka, because his panels are incredible, and how he does so much with so many different characters. Think of JJK. I'll argue there's a much smaller cast, but how much do we know about each of any of them? Maybe Todo, Sukuna, Gojo, Hakari, Itadori, and maybe Todo, if I ever said them. 6 characters, and we hardly know anything about them. He had Blue Lock with much more characters. We know so much more about them. Their personalities are so much more deeper, so much more refined, and the potential character in Nagi here is just so much more better with much less screen time comparatively, because of how much has to be separated to other characters. But the way he's done the potential with Nagi really shows us why he has the potential, the positives of the potential, the cons of the potential, the hardships of the potential, and where it could all go all together. That just makes Nagi such a great character, and because of how well we know him so far, whatever angle the author goes with, both feel satisfying because all the groundwork has already been done. So W author, I'm not gonna lie.
Voting surrounding Nagi's fate happened when we saw Ego specifically be critical of the super goal that Nagi made and the circumstances leading up to it. If Nagi is truly done, if he is truly locked off, as Ego says, you can hate it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you you can't. But the last thing you can say is that it wasn't built up to any degree. Whether or not that means anything to you is your decision. But I do value the pieces of the puzzle being scattered before us. It makes any conclusion we get all the more valuable. Maybe needing something like that to feel satisfied, in contrast with Gege's more subtle or spontaneous writing style, makes me the equivalent of a narrative Neanderthal, but it just is what it is. Whereas Megumi's conclusion certainly felt like a death for his character in a way, a large part of my intrigue in the character and Gege's approach with him died for me as well. Even being months and months removed from it, and having time to reflect has only slightly improved my opinion on the entire situation.
Let's pause this character. What do we know about any of these characters? Todo, he likes girls like Jennifer Lawrence, and he has a sister con kind of things. Mei, that she likes kids. Hakari, that is a gambler. Don't even know this person's name. Itadori, fair enough. Angel, what do we know about her? All these scrubs from the other class, like I think this is Nekamaru here. Like, who are they? The sister, hardly anything about that, but a little bit of prejudice. Nanami, great character. Maki, great character. These 3, no complaints here. Who is this? What's this person's name? You know what I mean? All these characters, don't know anything about them. But
the acceptance of his departure is easier because I feel as if the writing was always there. Maybe in a language I didn't understand at the time, but they're all the same. And I think that Megumi and Nagi, for all of their similarities as potential men, especially ones that failed to reach it, really display the wide spectrum with which you can write characters like this. I'm sure there will be some people who watch this video and are the exact opposite of me, appreciating the novelty and subtlety of Megumi's journey and disliking the overt nature of Nagi's, and that's more than fair. For me, Jujutsu Kaisen has concluded. For better or worse, I know Megumi isn't getting any more material, and because of that, I'm able to solidify my opinion on the matter with everything being laid out for me.
I agree.
With Nagi, there is still room for movement, upwards or downwards, room for a decision to be made that I couldn't expect. Maybe that'll improve his character arc even more. Maybe it won't. But for the time being, I know that I appreciate the more consistently reinforced nature of his shortcomings in comparison to the subtlety of Megumi's. At the end of the day, this is simply my perspective on how potential can kill characters within the narrative. If you enjoyed the video, consider
Very,
subscribing and
very
hitting
good video, and I completely agree with basically everything he said. The way the potential character be handled is so important that we have the proper groundwork to know why they have the potential and the pros, the cons, and where they go, where their journey could lead. And in my opinion, Nagi's has done so much better. Naturally, Blue Lock does seem to be a much longer story, and it is a case that Blue Lock could even hit 800 plus chapters compared to, I think, JJK's who only has up to 300. But Nagi, I do appreciate more of the narrative information we get, all the monologue, all the like dialogues we get from Nagi. I mean, from Ego saying why he's going wrong. Agi has his two pences. All these other characters he can bounce off and reflect to see this is what this he has all this potential. This character has less potential than him, but you have that hard work element or have the greater ego element that has a contrast which adds a level of dichotomy which you really want in these kind of stories. But yeah, great video. I want Nugget to come back stronger, and he's just a cool character in the end. Like you can never really go wrong with a white haired and with a white haired character. You really can't. Gojo, um, what's Killua, as to even Toshiro was mentioned earlier. You can never really go wrong. Just aura in the end of the day, isn't it? But that was the video for today. Apologies I was yapping too much. Blue Lock is one of my favorite mangas animes these days. Probably top 3 with One Piece. And it's not free. So yeah. I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you guys want more JJK content, let me know. If you want more Nagi content, let me know. If you just want more Blue Lock content as well, let me know. I'm always interested to seeing these kind of narrative story devices used and seeing what we can learn from them and how we can even just and see how different authors interpret them. But that was been me reacting to how potential kills characters. Like and subscribe, and until next time, ciao.